getting on with being isolated satisfactory. I hope your families are well. I'm delighted that we've been able to set this up so we can meet again, if only virtually. We've got John Bergwerk on this afternoon, and most of you have probably heard from him already. His interesting speeches and presentations. Today he's talking about Groucho Marx. And I think really without further ado, I will hand over to him just to say, if there's time at the end, we will try and get some questions for John, but we've already started a bit late. So let's see how we get on. And then we'll try and get some questions at the end. So John, thank you very much for being the first person on. Over to you, and we'll sit back and listen to you for the next nearly hour or so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Stuart, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm delighted to be able to speak to you and hopefully start a number of these sessions for you. What I'm actually going to do is use a presentation to do this, which is going to enable you to see my slides on your screen and also hopefully to actually hear some sound coming through from Groucho himself. So in order to do that, I'm going to, you don't need to do anything. I am going to share my screen with you. And with any luck, what should come up is an entire screen with just one slide in it. Stuart, I can see you. Can you give me a thumbs up if that's what you can see? Can you see a screen with just Groucho on it? Yes, I'll take that as a yes. Stuart, is that okay? Stuart, can you? Stuart, can you see the screen with Groucho on it?
Yes, it's fine. Absolutely fine.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Perfect. I just wanted to check it's working. Okay.
I was muted, so I.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay. So, as you know, Groucho Marx was hugely popular in his lifetime, and with quips like this that we can see, he's very memorable in what he says. But of course, he didn't want to belong to any club that would have him as a member. And today we're going to try to find out why. So let me start off with a summary of the individual. Okay, so he was a comedian, obviously, a writer on stage, in film, on radio, and a TV star, which many of you may not know. With his brothers, he made 13 different feature films, and they were the first box office comedy team of the talking film era. But he had an even more successful solo career as the host of the radio and TV game show You Bet Your Life. He had an incredible distinctive stage appearance carried on from his days when he was a star in vaudeville, including this exaggerated stooped posture, his glasses, a cigar, this moustache, which was a thick grease paint painted on with his eyebrows. A wide range of comedic gifts. He was very physical, he used verbal insult, slapstick, sarcasm, a whole range. No institution or symbol of authority was sacrosanct to him. He was anti-establishment and anarchic, viewing life from the underdog position. So he mocked tyranny, stupidity, and arrogance wherever he found it. He was the master of insult comedy and the creator of an absurd world. And he was the archetype of a quick-thinking, wisecracking Jew who was abrasive, neurotic, and candid. So setting the standard for much of Jewish humor later in the century. But despite his huge popularity, he was rarely satisfied either professionally or personally. He had troubled relationships with his parents. He clashed with his brothers. He had a string of failed marriages, and he acted destructively towards his children. He was the irascible outsider, a depressive clown, the child who never grew up. The cocksure Groucho was forever in conflict with the insecure Julius, his real name. And I'll try to explain all that over the next hour or so. So let's start off with his background. His mother, Minnie Schoenberg, she came to America from Dornum in northern Germany when she was 16 years old. She was a fierce and tyrannical woman and was feared by all her sons until they were in their 30s. She demanded and they jumped. Minnie's father, Leif, was a traveling ventriloquist and magician, and her mother, Fanny, played the harp for the dancing that followed his act. They retired once they moved to the States, and Groucho later commented on this. For some curious reason, there seemed to be practically no demand for a German ventriloquist and a woman harpist who yodeled in a foreign language. They were the last ones, this couple here, for whom Judaism had any religious meaning. Minnie's brother was called Al Schoenberg, and his stage name was Al Sheen. He was a noted vaudeville act in the early 20th century, and it was Sheen who would be most influential in creating the brothers' successful personas. Groucho's father was Simon or Sam Max. He changed his name from Marx and had come to the States from Alsace-Lorraine in Germany at the time. He shunned French as a language and a culture, and so of course was called Frenchy by his sons throughout his life. He met Minnie, who was working in a clothing sweatshop doing some needlework, and he met her at a dancing school in 1884, where he was his good-looking instructor. Frenchy was an accomplished cook, but worked as a tailor from home. And Groucho described him as, you can see here, the most inept tailor that Yorkville, the area of New York where they lived, ever produced. The notion that Pop was a tailor was an opinion that was held only by him. Groucho, as well as all the brothers, had no respect for his father's weaknesses and mocked him mercilessly. Here's another quote about him. He loved to laugh. Frequently, he laughed at a joke he didn't understand. And after we explained it to him, he would laugh all over again. So Groucho was the third of the 5 surviving sons. Let me go through them in order. So Leonard was the oldest. He was born in 1887, and he's later going to be known as Chico. And Chico's the bad son. Minnie, of course, adored him. He excelled at maths at school, but was a compulsive gambler by the age of 9, and that led him to being a thief. So he's often going to steal the family's possessions and pawn them to subsidize his addictions and pay off his debts. So his brothers learned to hide their toys. He had his mother's extroverted personality. The next one was Arthur, who became known as Harpo. He was born in 1888. He was quiet and dreamy and was French's favorite son. He left school very early, aged 8, and he was virtually illiterate, having been labeled as slow by his teachers. And he was brutalized at school by some Irish American bullies who literally picked him up and dropped him out of the school window. Groucho, the third son, was born Julius Henry Marx on the 2nd of October, 1890. He was unassuming, unremarkable, and largely unheard and unseen as a middle son. He tried to be the good son, but he never earned Minnie's love, and so he often felt rejected and insecure and inadequate, and that's going to influence him significantly in his life going forward. He would turn this abundant self-pity he had into humor. Harpo and Chico, his 2 elder brothers, looked alike. They had fair coloring and regular features, whilst you can see here that Groucho's got a more prominent nose. It was almost as if there was 2 Aryans and 1 Semite. And Minnie often berated Groucho for not having the looks or the charm of his brothers. And noticing that his resentment at all the attention that she lavished on them, she called him der Eifersüchtige, the jealous one. So he was the outsider. the butt of Minnie's barbs and put-downs. There were two younger brothers. The next one was Milton, who became known as Gummo. He was born in 1893. And then finally, Herbert, or Zeppo, who was born quite a gap afterwards, 1901. So the first four in a period of 6 years, and then this gap, and then Zeppo, 8 years younger. The family grew up in a crowded and chaotic 3-bedroom apartment in the non-Jewish but German neighborhood of Yorkville on the Upper East Side in Manhattan, in New York. The family were outsiders, and throughout their lives, the brothers only felt truly comfortable when they were with each other. The house was full of poverty and competition and indifference. So this trained him to improvise and believe that anything was possible. The boys all shared one room, and later Marx described it as crammed like sardines in one double bed. Minnie's father and mother lived with the family, as did an adopted sister. Groucho's early ambition was to become a doctor, but the family had a need for income, so this meant he had to leave school age 12, and he worked as a delivery boy at Hetner's wig factory. He always resented having his education curtailed and felt inadequate in the company of more educated people. But he had a pleasant soprano voice and the ability to remain in key when he was singing. So he used this to pique his mother's interests. And his later stage persona, with the fluttering eyelids and jumping into women's laps, reflected the way he got her attention. Minnie arranged for Groucho to sing in the choir of an Episcopal church, and that paid $1 per service. He first took to the stage as a boy singer with the Jean Leroy Trio, left the wig factory, and went on the road age 15. So by 1907, Minnie had created an undistinguished vaudeville singing group called the Three Nightingales, and that consisted of Groucho, Gummo, and a girl called Mabel O'Donnell, whose main characteristic was that her voice always veered off key. A short time afterwards, that got changed into the Four Nightingales. And here you can see it consisted of 3 of the Marx brothers, so Groucho, Harpo, and Gummo, and then Lou Levy at the bottom. And they traveled the different vaudeville circuits, making little impact. They went throughout the East. When they got rid of that, they moved to Chicago and to play the Midwest. And these early touring days were very tough. Harpo's later going to describe them as unmitigated hell. They often did 30 shows a week in unglamorous small towns, playing to small audiences, and they frequently failed commercially. They basically survived because of Minnie's force of character, and she was great at doing wheeler dealing. One night they arrived at this place called Nacogdoches in Texas. This is a picture taken around this time. And they had a very dispiriting performance. The crowd were heckling them. There was hardly anyone there. So Gummo and Harpo began cracking jokes on stage for their own amusement. And much to their surprise, the audience liked them better as comedians than singers. And that's the start of their act. And another night, here we go. Here's all the family, by the way. So you can see this is them all in order as I've put on the top there. You can see mother and father and all 5 sons, the only picture I've found of them all. So one night when they were touring in Illinois, the brothers were playing poker with Art Fisher, and he was parodying a popular comic strip called Sherlocko the Monk. And Fisher gave, which is obviously about Sherlock Holmes, but with the O on the end. And Fisher gave the brothers each a nickname based upon their real life personality and then put an O on the name. And that's how they got their names. So you can see that Julius, the one on the left, he had a bitter, sour nature, and he was a worrier and a pessimist. So he became Groucho. He was also the group's treasurer, by the way. He kept all the money, and he stored their earnings in something called a grouch bag. So that's a double reason for his name. The next one on the left, that's Milton, who was a hypochondriac, and he put on waterproof gum shoes, or Wellington boots as we call them, whenever it rained. And so he became called Gummo. Zepp, the young one in the middle, that's Italian slang for baby. So he was the youngest, so that's why it was called that. Second from the right is Leonard, the womanizer. So he was called Chico. I got Chico. And then finally, Adolf on the right, he played the harp, so he became known as Harpo. The brothers performed using ethnic accents. Here's an early advert for their actual role. And their real personalities came out in their stage acts. So Chico developed the Italian accent he had used as a child to convince bullies that he was Italian, not Jewish. And at this point, I'm going to play you a clip to show how that actually works from a film called Duck Soup, which is much later, but it gives you an idea of how he actually was.
You understand that this guy, he's a worker for me. I ask him something, and he tell me nothing. I ask him why I don't speak. All the time he don't speak. What do you think he do? He make a fight to go like this.
Hey, what's the idea?
Oh, that's not my idea. That's his idea. All the time I say something, he don't say nothing. Every time I speak...
Will you shut up? Hey, listen, what are you doing around here? Who are you? Hey, can't you say... Can't you say anything?
No, he don't say nothing.
Oh, shut up.
I am a shut up, but mister, you don't understand. Look, he's a spy and I'm a spy. He work for me. I want him to find out something, but he don't find out what I want to find out. Now, how am I going to find out what I want to find out if he don't find out what I got to find out?
Will you quit annoying me?
All right, I quit. All you got to do is make him stop doing this.
Oh. Now, just for that, I'm going to tear you limb from limb, limb from limb. It'll take to do the same. Well, now, you see, I don't say one thing, mister, before when you... No, honest? Don't.
Okay, so you can see Chico is on the left there. Harpo is on the right. He tended to wear a curly red wig and became this character called Patsy Brannigan. So this stereotypical Irish character, which if you remember, he was beaten up by Irish kids at schools who was kind of getting his own back on them. And his innocent pantomime manner was really an echo of silent films. Harpo really didn't like speaking on stage. And it was Al Sheen, their uncle, who suggested that he stop speaking altogether and simply mime. And you can see he was miming in that one.
You understand that this guy, he's a worker for me. I ask him something, and he tell me nothing. I ask him why I don't speak. All the time he don't speak. What do you think he do? He make a fight to go like this.
I've just played that one. And here we have another one with him showing his skills at miming. Let me show you this one.
You know, I'd be lost without a telephone. Hey, don't go away. I want to talk to you. Now, where were we? Oh, yes. Now that you're Secretary of War, what kind of an army do you think we ought to have?
Well, I tell you what I think. I think we should have a standing army.
Why should we have a standing army?
Because then we save money on chairs.
Peanuts. Scat. Say, who are you anyway? I don't go in much for modern art. Have you got anything by one of the old masters? Not bad. You don't happen to have her telephone number? Say, you could be a big help to me. Where do you live? Well, it's not much of a place, but it's home. Meow.
Okay, so that's again taken from Duck Soup. Originally, Groucho's character was in his first show that they did called Fun in the High School, was a mustachioed older teacher with a German accent. And that was the basis for the dirty old man that he's going to play in the future. After the sinking, however, of the Lusitania in 1915 during the war, his German character was booed. So he dropped the accent and developed the fast-talking wise guy character that you just saw in that previous clip. And this is going to become his trademark. He focused on verbal puns and double entendres, and he spoke in a cascading way, walking with a distinctive bent-kneed lope, with exaggerated grease paint moustache and eyebrows, as you can see on the left. So the right is what he looked like in real life. And he had this ever-present cigar, obviously. In 1915, the brothers had their first commercial and critical success in a vaudeville show called Home Again. And they became the biggest comedic stars of the Palace Theatre in New York, playing for 60 straight weeks to much public acclaim. In 1922, they brought their show to London, but British audiences had trouble understanding their zany humour. And the audience heckled and threw pennies, which provoked one of Groucho's most famous ad-libs. Friends, he said, it's been an expensive trip. The least you could do is throw silver. They returned to New York, but they then fell out with the main vaudeville promoter. It's going to be a feature of them. They fell out with just about everyone over their lives. And they were out of work for many months, and they, in fact, nearly went bankrupt and considered giving up the act. However, Chico's negotiation skills, which he got from his mother, and his optimism, meant that he managed to get 3 fantastic deals, and that led to their major hit shows on Broadway. What he did, instead of negotiating a salary, he agreed a 10% cut of the gross takings. So they wrote a show, they toured extensively so they could practice it, and that led to this a review called I'll Say She Is, which opened at the Casino Theatre in May 1924. It was a complete sensation. Following that came The Coconuts, which ran for 377 shows on Broadway between 1925 and 1928. And finally, their greatest Broadway hit, Animal Crackers, which was from 28 to 30. The shows contained much spontaneous ad-libbing, especially from Groucho, which meant that the fans kept on coming back to see the show again and again because it kept on changing from night to night. No other comedy group made such an impact on the Broadway circuit. The brothers were so popular that they seemed incapable of doing anything wrong, and this encouraged them to be even more outrageous and zany in their approach. So this is them, the 4 brothers who were part of the show at this time in the order. And clearly that is mimicking this original photograph I showed you of the 4 brothers, the 3 brothers and the extra lad when they were much younger. In the late 1920s, Groucho moved to a 10-room house in Long Island. It cost $27,000 in those days, a huge amount. He was living next to celebrities such as Hammerstein and Eugene O'Neill and P.G. Wodehouse. So he had really made it. But then, in 1929, came the stock market crash, and that virtually wiped him out. He lost $250,000 in total. And that led to his moods and insomnia and depression. And about this time also, the mother, Minnie, died, aged 64. And this was a big loss to them. She'd been the glue which has stuck them all together. 1931, they came back to London to lots of acclaim. And when they returned, he sold his New York house and he moved to Hollywood, where all the brothers were. And they started making films. In total, he's going to make 26 films, 13 of them with Chico and Harpo. They were paid $75,000 per picture to turn the Coconuts and Animal Crackers into movies. So their Broadway hits into movies. The third one, called Monkey Business, was the first cinematic one. So it wasn't a show, it was a film in its own right. And they were paid $200,000 for it, plus 50% of the net profit. So they really were the stars of the day. They made other successful films, including Duck Soup, which I've mentioned before. This is probably my favorite film. I'm going to show quite a few clips from it today. Once when Groucho was asked why it was called Duck Soup, he responded, well, you take 2 turkeys, 1 goose, 4 cabbages, but no duck, and mix them together. After 1 taste, you'll duck soup the rest of your life. So they made Duck Soup, which is an anti-fascist film, by the way. And also they made Horse Feathers, which is, I'm also going to show a clip from, which is their typical zany humor.
Hey, Barabelli.
What do you want?
Watch the door for a few minutes. And don't let anyone in without the password.
All right, what is it?
Swordfish is the password, do you understand?
Okay, I got it.
Well, what is it?
Password.
Swordfish! Swordfish!
Right, the swordfish, the swordfish.
Ah.
Piazza Mascoso in the room for la faccia di pazzi. Who are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Who are you?
I'm fine, too, but you can't come in unless you give the password.
Oh, what is the password?
Oh, no, you got to tell me. Hey, I tell what I do. I give you 3 guesses. It's the name of a fish.
Is it Mary?
That's no fish.
She isn't. Well, she drinks like one. Let me see. Is it sturgeon?
Hey, you crazy. Sturgeon, he's a doctor who cuts you open when you're sick. Now, I give you one more chance.
I got it. Haddock.
That's funny. I got a headache, too.
What do you take for a haddock?
Well, now, sometimes I take aspirin, or sometimes I take a calomel.
Say, I'd walk a mile for a calomel.
You mean chocolate calomel. I like that, too, but you know, guess it. Hey, what's the matter? You don't understand English? You can't come in here unless you say swordfish. Now, I'll give you one more guess.
Swordfish. Swordfish. I think I got it. Is it swordfish?
That's it. You guess it.
Pretty good, huh?
Fine. You guess it.
What do you want?
I want to come in.
What's the password?
Oh, you're no fool of me. Swordfish.
No, I got tired of that. I changed it.
What's the password now?
Gee, I forgot it. I better come outside with you.
So that's so typical that Chico tends to be the straight man to Groucho's clever humor. They also made a film called A Night at the Opera, and also A Day at the Races with MGM. Now let's have a look at the plots of these films were very thin, even non-existent, but the humor is something special, I think.
All right, it says the first part of the party of the first part shall be known in this contract as the first part of the party of the first part shall be known in this contract. Look, why should we quarrel about a thing like this? We'll take it right out, huh?
Yeah, it's too long anyhow. Now what do we got left?
Well, I got about 1.5 feet. Now it says the party of the second part shall be known in this contract as the party of the second part.
Well, I don't know about that.
Now what's the matter?
I don't like the second party either.
Well, you should have come to the first party. We didn't get home till around 4 in the morning. I was blind for 3 days.
Hey, look. Why can't the first part of the second party be the second part of the first party? Then you got something.
Well, look, rather than go through all that again, what do you say?
Fine.
Now I've got something here you're bound to like. You'd be crazy about it.
No, I don't like it.
You don't like what?
Whatever it is, I don't like it.
Well, let's break up an old friendship over a thing like that. Ready?
Okay. Now, the next part, I don't think you're going to like.
Well, your word's good enough for me. Now then, is my word good enough for you?
I should say not.
Well, that takes out 2 more clauses. Now, the party of the 8th part...
No, that's no good, no.
The party of the 9th...
No, that's no good, too. Hey, how's it my contract is skinnier than yours?
Well, I don't know. You must have been out on the tail last night. But anyhow, we're all set now, aren't we?
Oh, sure.
Now, just you put your name right down there, and then the deal is legal.
Hey, I forgot to tell you, I can't write.
No, that's all right. There's no ink in the pen anyhow. But listen, it's a contract, isn't it?
Oh, sure.
We've got a contract, no matter how small it is.
Hey, wait. What does this say here, this thing here?
Oh, that's the usual clause. That's in every contract. That just says, if any of the parties participating in this contract are shown not to be in their right mind, the entire agreement is automatically nullified.
Well, I don't know.
It's all right. That's in every contract. That's what they call a sanity clause.
You can't fool me. There ain't no sanity clause.
Very good. Right. So I hope there's no lawyers in the room. So their success led them to appear on the front cover of the Time magazine, which, as you know, means they'd really made it. That's in August 1932. And his verbal dexterity made him ideal for these new talking films. He was great at improvising insults to stuffy dowagers, often played by Margaret Dumont. And in a repeat of his childhood experiences with his mother, usually the actress continued to talk to him as though nothing had happened, as though he hadn't even been heard. And here we have an example of that, how he is with her at the night of the opera.
Will you do me a favor and stop yelling my name all over this restaurant? Do I go around yelling your name?
Mr. Driftwood.
Say, is your voice changing or is somebody else paging me around here?
Mr. Driftwood.
Why, Mrs. Claypool, hello.
Mr. Driftwood, you invited me to dine with you at 7 o'clock. It is now 8 o'clock and no dinner.
What do you mean, no dinner? I just had one of the biggest meals I've ever ate in my life. And no thanks to you, either.
I've been sitting right here since 7 o'clock.
Yes, with your back to me. When I invite a woman to dinner, I expect her to look at my face. That's the price she has to pay. You check, sir. $9.40? This is an outrage. If I were you, I wouldn't pay it. Now then, Mrs. Claypool, what are we going to have for dinner?
You've had your dinner.
All right, we'll have breakfast. Waiter.
Yes, sir.
Have you got any milk-fed chicken?
Yes, sir.
Well, squeeze the milk out. I want to bring me a glass.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Driftwood, 3 months ago, you promised to put me into society. In all that time, you've done nothing but draw a very handsome salary.
You think that's nothing, huh? How many men do you suppose are drawing a handsome salary nowadays? Why, you can count them on the fingers of one hand, my good woman.
I'm not your good woman.
Don't say that, Mrs. Claypool. I don't care what your past has been. To me, you'll always be my good woman, because I love you. There. I didn't mean to tell you, but you dragged it out of me. I love you.
It's rather difficult to believe that when I find you dining with another woman.
That woman? Do you know why I sat with her? Because
No.
she reminded me of you.
Really?
Of course. That's why I'm sitting here with you. Because you remind me of you. Your eyes, your throat, your lips. Everything about you reminds me of you. Except you. How do you account for that? She figures that one out. She's good.
Mr. Driftwood, I think we'd better keep everything on a business basis.
How do you like that? Every time I get romantic with you, you want to talk business. I don't know. There's something about me that brings out the business in every woman. All right, we'll talk business. You see that man over there eating spaghetti?
No?
Well, you see the spaghetti, don't you? Now, behind that spaghetti is none other than Herman Gottlieb, director of the New York Opera Company. Do you follow me?
Yes?
Well, stop following me. I'll have you arrested. Now, I have arranged for you to invest $200,000 in the New York Opera Company.
I don't understand.
Don't you see? You'll be a patron of the opera. You'll get into society. Then you can marry me, and they'll kick you out of society. And all you've lost is $200,000.
Excellent. So Groucho and Chico did some radio shows in the late 30s, but they got accused of copyright infringement. And in fact, they were convicted of it. The first time a Hollywood entertainment had been convicted of criminal plagiarism. They both fined $1,000, but didn't go to jail. And they maintained their innocence throughout, really. they made a whole series of other films, but they really weren't as successful as the ones they've made in the height of their career, like this. The last one, penultimate one, sorry, was called A Night in Casablanca, which was actually a takeoff of the famous Casablanca. And and I have a clip of that coming up.
But monsieur, but.
Sound like a motorboat. Give me. Hello? What's that, sir? You've been up in your room 3.5 hours and your trunks haven't arrived? Well, put your pants on. Nobody will know the difference.
Out of the way, please. Sorry now.
Clerk! Mr. Cornblow to you.
Have you a suite for me and my wife?
Your wife, eh?
Yes, and we'd like something very elegant.
I see. Have you got any baggage?
Of course. It's on its way over from the airfield.
In all the years I've been in the hotel business, that's the phoniest story I've ever heard. I suppose your name is Smith.
No, it's Smythe, spelled with a Y.
Oh, that's the English version. Mr. and Mrs. Smythe and no baggage.
What? How dare you, sir?
How do you like that? Puts a Y in Smith and expects me to let him in the hotel with a strange name.
Strange dame?
She is to me. I've never seen her before.
Sir, you may not be aware of it, but I am president of the Morocco Laundry Company.
You are? Well, take this shirt and have it back Friday. Mr. Smythe? Or Smith? This is a family hotel, and I suggest you take your business elsewhere.
Sir, this lady is my wife. You should be ashamed.
If this lady is your wife, you should be ashamed.
You'll hear from me.
Do that, even if it's only a postcard.
Sir, my attorneys will be here in the morning.
Yeah, well, they won't get a room either unless they got a marriage license. Clerk.
Excellent. So that's the end of his film career, really. That was effective. And many of the brothers didn't do much after that. He tried doing some radio, but he didn't like it, really. He had to memorize the lines. And it's sort of because he didn't have to memorize the lines. He liked the radio, I beg your pardon. And he didn't need to wear makeup or costumes, which he also liked. But the radio show he had for 1 year, he wasn't very effective at. And after a year, in fact, he was replaced by Danny Kaye, and work was very thin on the ground. There were other shows being hosted by people like Bob Hope and Jack Benny, and he thought he was just as good as that. But he wasn't able to take them up. And so he ended up advertising a whole range of products of pens and shirts and magazines, just picking up any old work, really. By 1947, he started hosting a radio quiz program called You Bet Your Life. And after a very slow start, it moved from radio to the booming and new area of TV in 1950 and ran for 11 years. It was filmed before a live audience, and the show consisted of Groucho bantering with the contestants, seemingly ad-libbing jokes before quizzing them. And it was one of the most popular shows in the 1950s and raised his reputation into being one of the top comedians of the time. So here's a clip from You Bet Your Life to show you how it goes.
And now, here he is, the one, the only...
That's me, Groucho Marx.
You're a very pretty girl, you know that?
Thank you.
Did you know that?
Oh, I've heard it, to be honest.
You don't have to be honest with me, you know.
Yeah, no.
I don't propose to be honest with you. What are you taking in college besides Bob?
I'm taking a major in medicine.
You're taking a major in medicine, huh? Is your husband aware of this?
No, I mean a major like
Are you taking him for everything he's got? Or just...
No, it's the line of study you pursue in order to get your degree.
You pursue the major. Who are you taking in college, Bob? A lieutenant in the wax?
No, I'm studying law.
Oh, well, I don't blame you. She's going to carry on with the first major. At least you'll be able to sue the guy. Let me hear you talk like a lawyer. I mean, give me some shyster talk.
talk Scheiße, right? I can give you some,
You don't talk Scheiße talk, huh?
No, we don't talk.
Don't get any of my business, huh?
We have terms such as habeas corpus and nolo contender.
Nola contender. I knew her well, eh?
No, nolo
A little Spanish girl. Well, I wonder where she is tonight.
Nolo contender actually means that there's...
What does it mean?
It means there's no fight, there's no contest.
That's Nola, all right.
Okay. So he was really very successful in his own right. This show won an Emmy for him for being the most outstanding personality. When it moved TV channels, he was guaranteed $750,000 annually for the show, plus $50,000 weekly each time it ran, and 38% of the profit. So it was really minting it in. And in 1951, he made it to the front cover of Time again, this time on his own. In terms of his personal life, he was married 3 times, each time to Gentiles, and each time it ended in divorce. He married Ruth Johnson first in 1920. He was 29, she was 19. She was a beautiful dancer, in fact, originally part of their act. And they had 2 children, Arthur and Miriam. But the couple weren't suited temperamentally. She was a party girl, he was a bookish loner, and he dominated and bullied her, telling her how she could spend her money, and in fact trying to displace her as a mother. So he would rush home between performances to wash Arthur and play with him. He hired a housekeeping couple who only spoke German, which Ruth did not understand, and sent her away to eat dinner by herself in the kitchen when they argued. She became an alcoholic and she divorced him in 1942. In a desire to recreate his childhood, which his mother had taken away from him, he loved to be around children all the time. He seemed to have romances with his children rather than his wives, but grew bored with them when they grew up. He wanted their adulation, and in many ways, he remained a little boy who just wanted to be loved. Arthur, his son, said of the 1920s Groucho, "No son ever had a more doting father than I had, or a more conscientious one, or a more entertaining one, or a father who was more of a buddy." His second wife was Kay Mervis, who had suffered an abusive marriage and had been brought into the house by his daughter, Miriam. So Groucho is 54 and Kay 21 when they married. They had a daughter called Melinda. They're going to divorce in 1951, Kay having had a breakdown. So initially she was attractive to Groucho because of her vulnerability, but later he found this unbearable. Like his first wife, she developed a drinking problem, and Groucho got custody of Melinda. He married the actress Eden Harford in 1954, and she's in her mid-20s. There's a pattern here, as you can see. That's nearly 40 years younger than he was. They divorced amicably in 1969, and despite their divorce, they still appeared together in public, Groucho commenting, "I want to be near my money." He had to give her millions. The relationships were often distrustful and based upon his cynical persona. He was often sarcastic and threatening with his wives and made them look fools in public. All the women who loved him tried to please him, but they failed, and all would turn to alcohol. He seemed to be attracted to women with insecurities, but he exacerbated those. For the last 7 years of his life, his companion or manager was the actress Erin Fleming, and he was besotted with her. She did much to revive his popularity, putting on shows and so forth, and also lobbying for an honorary Academy Award at the Oscars, which he won in 1974. But she pushed him to the limits of his endurance, largely for her own personal gain. He was back being a helpless child, and Erin was the bullying mother role, which he'd had so many years earlier. She eventually controlled most aspects of his life, and his children became estranged from him. And in fact, she's giving him tranquilizers to make him manageable. It all ends in a horrible legal affair and gets very messy. Chico died in 1961, Harpo in 64, Gummo had a heart attack in 1977, and Groucho himself died from respiratory problems in 1977, aged 86. He had a Jewish funeral service and was cremated. And I think I've got, yeah, Zeppo died of lung cancer in 79. And in 2006, at her 80th birthday celebration, Queen Elizabeth II quoted Groucho, "Anyone can get old, all you have to do is live long enough." So that's his life. Let's briefly look at his comedy, if I can. Really unparalleled in his inflection and timing. He had a natural gift for making people laugh and blush, and overwhelmed people with the power of his wit and just the volume of his jokes. So he could get away with saying things which other people couldn't. So I've just got some examples of his humor here. So I suppose quips and word plays. If you had 10 apples and wanted to divide them among 6 people, what would you do? Well, you'd make applesauce. My mother called sister downstairs the other day. "I'm taking a bath," my sister did say. "Well, slip on something quick. Here comes Mr. Brown." She slipped on the top step and then came down. That's actually a song. I couldn't sing it for you. And finally, "The garbage man is here. Well, tell him we don't want any." I hope you're laughing at these. Second set, all to do with riches to rags, which is kind of his take on the reverse which he followed, although he never felt he was rich. "Think of the opportunities here in Florida. 3 years ago, I came to Florida without a nickel in my pocket. Now I've got a nickel in my pocket." Bellboy to the boss. "It's all very well, Mr. Hammer, but we haven't been paid in 2 weeks. We want our wages." Hammer replied, "Wages? Do you want to be wage slaves? Answer me that." And finally, worked myself up from nothing to a state of extreme poverty. And finally, some anarchy. I see if I can get the accents right. "One day I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How he got into my pajamas, I'll never know. We tried to remove the tusks, but they were embedded so firmly we couldn't budge them. Of course, in Alabama, the tusks are looser, but that's entirely irrelevant to what I'm talking about." And those are my principles. If you don't like them, well, I've others. I'm sure many modern politicians would agree with that. And we have to have a war. I've already paid a month's rent on the battlefield. Perhaps his most famous saying was this: "I don't want to belong to any club that will accept me as a member." And really, there's a whole range of ways that that can be interpreted. I've just got a few here which people have seen of it as. So the first one is humility, I suppose. He may have meant that his self-loathing was so intense and his self-esteem so low that he wanted nothing to do with any person or organization that regarded him in a positive light. So his life's work was discrediting his ego, and he thought he was contemptible. So that's an obvious meaning. Another way to look at it is the complete reverse. He knew himself better than others and was brutally honest, which meant that he felt he was above everyone else who didn't realize that he was unworthy of any honor. So he was therefore superior to any club or group. So he's coming across as arrogant and superior. Much of his humor was to do with anarchy. So this famous quote of his, "Whatever it is, I'm against it." So it's an extreme form of freedom seeking. He stood for nothing, and he was freeing himself from the need for approval from others. Or from a Jewish angle, maybe he was just lampooning the assimilationist Jew who got rid of Judaism in favor of the restrictions placed on him by others. But it was going to come to no good end. And the holding of these opposite views is obviously inherent in Jewish tradition. There's a famous quote from Rabbi Simcha Bunan, which is like this: everyone must have two pockets so that he can reach into the one or the other according to his needs. In one pocket are to be the words, "For my sake was the world created. I've got this arrogance." And in the second pocket, "I am but dust and ashes," this humility. And in many ways, this ambiguous phrase that he created was a typical of that. So let's try and sum up what he was really like. He was driven to climb the social ladder by his deprived childhood. He was ambitious to improve himself and live the American dream. He was an anxious perfectionist, but had a neurotic lack of confidence in what he had done. The boy Julius was compelled to become the comedian Groucho. He feared failure more than he yearned for success. He lived, for the approval and love of the audience, but he didn't have the confidence this would last or that it was built upon solid ground. And he learned to deal with his mother's berating by developing his resilience and by verbally giving as good as he got. He later turned into his comedic style by compelling people to look at him and then holding their attention by refusing to make the slightest sense and by lashing out as his mother had done to him. The brothers were all highly sensitive to people in power. They refused to accept anyone else's authority, responding aggressively and emotionally to being told what to do. They had no respect for seniority, privilege, or social proprieties, and their films mocked everyone in authority. Groucho was the most abusive. For him, it was either persecute others or be persecuted himself. He was the least confident of the brothers. His mother told him he was unattractive, and he believed her, although he clearly wasn't. He was full of complexities and incapable of showing his vulnerability or having emotional relationships outside his mother and brothers. He had trouble trusting people or being intimate, and so he rejected others before he could be rejected himself. He felt increasingly angry because he was never loved in the way he wanted to be. Compulsively honest, he would say what he thought regardless of the consequences. He had a demanding ego which made him do unpardonable acts. The anti-hero, he often pushed the gag far too far. Aside from the use of the word schnorrers in Animal Crackers, the brothers never referred to their Jewishness in their films. Yet he's become synonymous with Jewish humor because of his alienation from accepted society and his disdain for authority. So having felt excluded all his life, he resigned from the club he once passionately wanted to join because the club of normal society was still treating him differently and reminding him of his origins. When a fan remarked how pleased he was to meet Groucho, he replied, "I've known him for years, and I can tell you it's no pleasure." But his films are pleasurable. And one of the most famous of all the scenes in Groucho's films is something called the mirror scene. This is also from Duck Soup, and I'm going to finish by playing you this famous scene.
It happens around the house.
all done without special effects. Let me stop sharing the screen. And thank you very much. That is Groucho Marx. I don't know whether...
Jonathan, thank you so much for a very entertaining hour. I'm not sure if we've got time for questions.
Yes, of course.
I don't know if Rabbi Nick is still on to help us with the technicalities. Just before people disappear, can I just cover a few points before we get into questions? We only had a maximum of 100 people who could join today, because that's how many we could get on Zoom. We did have 100. Rabbi Nick tells me he's upgraded the system to have 500, and other, not that we'll get 500, but capability to have over 100. We have 3 more Tuesdays booked, as you know, and next week is Daniel Adams, and that'll cover July. Clearly, this has been the first step for us in attempting this, and it's been a great success today to have 100 people. So we will have another committee meeting, a virtual one, and I'm sure we'll put together a program for July and onwards, because I think it's going to be some time before we can meet face-to-face again. We were hoping to stream this live on Facebook, but that didn't work today. But it has been recorded on the Shaw YouTube channel. So if you know anybody that wants to get in and see it, they can do that. I'm sure there's many quotes that you could have given us, Jonathan. In fact, I had a page up on my screen here on the computer by the side, and I was reading some of them. You've been highly entertaining. It's been extremely laughable as well, and very uplifting, let me say that. So I'm delighted that so many of you have joined us. Just in terms of, we would like to know perhaps what else all of our members would like to have on these programs. I don't think we can necessarily get into too much of that this afternoon, but if you would like to drop us an email, that might be the best way of coming up with some suggestions. The Bushy Sage email address is bushysage@gmail.com, and we'd be delighted to hear from you any thoughts or recommendations. Time perhaps for a few questions, but if I'll say at the end, but delighted that so many of you joined us. I hope you're keeping well, keep safe, keep well, and keep looking after yourselves. And I'm sorry we can't serve tea to you this afternoon. Right, some questions. How are we going to do this, Rabbi?
People that have got questions can raise hands. I think, oh, is that Sylvia with a hand in the air? No, no, my apologies. But we can take, if you can browse through your screen as well and see if people have got waving hands, then that will be helpful.
Howard has.
Cynthia. Okay, let's find you, Cynthia. We'll scroll down our participants here and we unmute you. Cynthia, we can hear you, I think. No, maybe not. Yeah. Cynthia, anybody? We can hear you. Oh, was it a different Cynthia, maybe? Was it Cynthia Loman, perhaps?
Howard Grant put his hands up.
Okay. We can hear you, Howard Grant.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, loud and clear.
Did Groucho or any of the brothers acknowledge their Judaism?
Not their religious Judaism, no. They were quite dismissive of it. They in fact were worried about anti-Semitism or being classified in that way. However, culturally, clearly, they were so ingrained within it, but not religiously, no.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I've got Sylvia's iPad down here. I'm just going to unmute. Off you go, Sylvia. Oh, I think maybe there's a button you have to press.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes, go on.
Right. I just wanted to ask you, did he write his own scripts?
It's a very good question. They wrote their own scripts to start off with, which he would never keep to, and he would change on the hoof. And in fact, there are stories whereby he did it deliberately to muck up other people. So to muck up his brothers. He did have script writers to write for him, famous script writers towards the end, and he would never pay much attention to what they wrote. So in fact, there's one famous story about one of their films that they did, and the script writer said at the end, "There's been a mistake. One of my lines has been kept in." So he was completely his own person. He had to do it his own way.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Rita, I think.
Okay.
Rita and Peter. Peter's iPad. Off you go, Rita.
I can't get the camera to work.
I can't
Yeah,
get
you're on. We can hear you, we can see you.
Can you see us?
Can you
Yep.
see us? Right,
Oh,
okay, right.
When in my youth, I used to do drawing. And that's one of the first drawings that I did when I was about 13 or 14. Can you see it?
Yes, very good. It looks like Harpo. No, it's no.
Well, no, there's 3 of them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, no, you can. You know.
Yeah. I used to enjoy doing that, and they were such characters, and it came out in the cartoon.
Brilliant.
I used to copy it, just draw it freehand, but it's one of the things I used to enjoy.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, any more, or should we let Jonathan go now? And I see a number of you already left to go have your cup of tea and cake, which is your normal habit. Numbers of
I'm going. Bye.
Thank you
very much.
Stuart, thank you so much.
Jonathan, thank you so much. We look forward to you coming back another day. Everybody, again, keep well, keep safe, look after yourselves. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.